Double check.
Who would like to volunteer to play a figured bass from the Morris book? You want to do that? Yes. Or anybody. Look like we have like all these keyboard people in class.
And turn that off.
Chapter 1, number 2.
Hey, that's what I did last lesson.
I know. It was inspiring, so I have to talk about it this morning. All right, so
Let me tell you, it wasn't the performance.
we'll start with a fragment of music and talk about some things that I feel are important. By the way, those of you that are interested in the Schenkerian stuff and are wondering how it is that you might produce a Schenkerian graph or what it's all about, there happens to be a great resource with the diehard Schenkerians. That might be questionable, but there is a great resource online, and it is by a person that I really would, when I was head of musical studies, would like to have invited to teach here at Curtis, but he is overseas, and that was not practical. His name is Tom Pankhurst, and he has a thing that's called the Schenker Guide. And it really is a step-by-step. It explains all the terminology and goes through that process just inch by inch, step by step. Starts with how to notate linear progressions, the use of slurs. Then he goes from that to the concept of the so-called fundamental structure and how you would approach looking at a piece in terms of trying to figure out how to begin a Schenkerian graph. And it goes through step by step, and it's pretty thorough, but I do warn you that it is the typical approach to music theory. So what concept do you think is immediately introduced?
Harmony.
Yeah, yes. Well, and you have to understand that Schenker's concept of harmony is quite different from conventional concepts in that he does not really believe that a musical structure is generated by fifth progression or harmonic progression. That the significance of harmony in a musical structure is basically due to the transformation of scale degrees into their own areas. And I go even further and try to demonstrate that each scale degree can become transformed into its own area. And so I try to support or bolster the idea that both voice leading in the horizontal and the vertical dimension are aspects of counterpoint, and that it is counterpoint that is responsible for the basic design in musical structure, and that the concept of harmony in the Schenkerian sense is an epiphenomenon and emerges through the transformation of dissonance into consonance. Now, Schenker clearly says this in the progression that supports 3, 2, 1. He says that the second scale degree in that melodic context is a dissonance, and it provides a means of continuance and completion from 3 to 1. And that is supported harmonically by the boundary interval of the tonality, which is the third harmonic, or the so-called dominant degree. Well, that is all accurate, I believe, but I would take out the word harmony, and I would replace it with boundary interval. And you can do that with any degree in the diatonic system. The problem is that you have to consider the fact that if you're expressing a single boundary interval, that all the degrees in the diatonic scale can't possibly have equal significance. And I've pointed out to you that there really is only one major consonant triad in the diatonic system, and one minor consonant triad. Everything else, if you build triads on each degree, they're going to appear as either major or minor chords, with the exception of the sonority that's built on the 7th degree, which is diminished. All right? There are no augmented sonorities in the diatonic system, so that has to be a product of some kind of inflectional procedure. But there is one imperfect fifth in a diatonic system, and that actually is composed of what scale degrees?
4 and 7.
7, 2, and 4. That gives you that diminished triad. Well, it turns out that the 2nd degree is, in my way of thinking, a relational property between 3 and 1 scale degree. So it passes between 1 and 3 or 3 and 1. And since the other consonant interval or consonant third is 3 to 5, 4 becomes a relation between 5 to 3 or 3 to 5. But then there's a problem with scale degree 6, because the juxtaposition of the 5th degree and the 6th degree, the 6th degree is beyond the boundary of the consonants in a diatonic system. Schenker clearly says this, and it is the only place in the system where there is another consonant next to a consonant. So 5 to 6 is the juncture between the upper boundary and what he calls the lower boundary. And so that creates a problem. If you have scale degrees 5 going to 7, and you imagine 6 as a passing tone, well, there's a problem with that. Why? Why would there be a problem with that?
6 isn't dissonant.
Yes, 6 is not dissonant, and 7 is dissonant. That's a major problem. So the third between the 5th degree and the 7th degree is a dissonant interval, but it is a transformed consonant interval. The G is a consonance, the B is a dissonance. It could also be that both of those tones, both in C, the G, and the B, would be dissonant. Well, that happens with the B and the D, or the 7th and the 2nd degree. But by fundamental principle, consonance is the only thing that sounds together. So that does produce a consonant sound. Are you following what I'm saying? So a linear progression that would go 5, 6, 7 is a transformed consonant progression. You can have that. And in that context, the 6th degree might be some kind of passing tone. That is, if the 5th and the 7th degree together produce a transformed consonant space. So the 6th degree loses its original status and functions as a dissonance between 5 and 7. You follow all that? Okay. Well, the Pankhurst Schenker guide explains all the terminology that occurs in Schenkerian thinking. Every term, as a matter of fact, there's a very extensive glossary, but it does take you step by step through the basic concepts of Schenkerian notation and how you discover what are the linear progressions and what are the underpinnings, and he talks about the fundamental structure. And so it's a great way to really learn some concrete ways in which you represent a musical structure. But I do add the idea that, it incorporates the theory of harmony in it. But you have to understand that in a Schenkerian sense, not in a Helmholtz or Riemann-esque type of thinking. All right, well, yes.
So when dissonance does sound together, it's just passing? Or
No, it
not
must
transformation?
always be consonant. Two dissonants together must produce a consonance. Otherwise, the theory of counterpoint and the theory of consonance and dissonance doesn't mean anything.
So, but when it does, it's just on the surface? Is that
Yes.
what you're saying?
Yes. Something like a 7th chord That is a simultaneous sounding of a dissonance with a consonant, but it is on the surface passing
Right.
between some vertical sonority that may or may not be totally consonant, or it could be transformed consonant.
Okay.
So if the entity like a dominant seventh, the dominant sonority is, by its nature, what kind of a sonority? Consonant or dissonant? It's dissonant. It has two dissonant tones in it. It has degree 7 and degree 2. And I just explained this, degree 7 and degree 2, when they sound together, produce a consonant interval. Degree 7 and degree 5, when they sound together, they produce a consonance. However, the degree 5 to degree 2 would be a transformed fifth consonance, yes? Right, but what happens when you add the seventh to it? Is that something that is directly added to it, or does it represent some deeper or transformed process?
Passing from the G, right?
Yes, it passes from the octave or the fifth degree expressed as an octave through the passing tone. So the progression becomes 8, 7, 6. That has to pass on to a different sonority. But the octave origin of that dissonance is not pronounced. That's how you have seventh chords that appear literally on the surface without preparation. And so that theory of the seventh chord is consistent with the theory of counterpoint, with the theory of consonance and dissonance. And more elaborate sonorities like ninths and 11ths and 13ths are derived in precisely the same way. They wouldn't make sense if they weren't derived like that. Okay, well, now this is a little more complicated topic, but it's interesting. It came up during Omri's lesson yesterday, and I think it's well worth recapitulating. Michael is going to play, not attempt to play, he's going to play in a very moderate tempo, right? An example from the first chapter of the Morris figured bass. Okay? Hit it. Chapter 1, number 2. Yeah, you're right. Play it slowly, not like a virtuoso. No pedal. Oh, that's very beautiful. All right. Did you get that? All right. What key is that in? Play an A. Yes, oh, very good. Okay. Well, it's clearly in some kind of F major, right? And what about the sonorities in that? Are they like seventh chords, inversions? What are they? You could put this together since I said it was from chapter 1. You know what the book is. They're all root position, right? Okay, if you want to call them root position, I would say that they're 5/3. Okay? Now, tell me something about that. Is there any kind of phrasal structure in this, or does it just like go completely through?
There's that bit before it in the middle.
That's a very
There's a half
informative.
note, right?
What?
On the half note, or fermata, or whatever it was.
Two phrases.
And I think you hear two phrases. Do you not hear two phrases? Everybody hears that? Okay. All right. Well, I think this little example is quite complicated. It's actually, if you interpret it simply by the nature of the melody that's there, you get into trouble. At least I think so. And it's hiding a lot of details that I think your mind is hearing or performing in order to interpret that structure, right? What's another thing that happens in this little exercise? Are there any chromatic elements in it?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, Michael, play it one more time. Stop. Okay? Now, where have we gone so far? Nowhere.
Just
Nowhere. I would like to see if oh, by the way, I'm not going to erase that. Let's do this. Now, that's where we are so far, yes? And what's in the bass?
Fa, si, sol, do, do, fa, re, sol. Do, do.
Right? Is that in the right register too? Basically? Okay. Well, if you take these individual lines and notes in the bass, what do you find? If you say that the fundamental is F, the boundary interval is C, those are like two consonances. Are there elements? What is the B flat? Is that a consonance or a dissonance?
Distance.
What degree is it?
Four.
It's 4, right? That is followed by what degree? 2. That is a transformed consonance, right? Now, what do you mean by that? Where is this B flat going? The only type of dissonance that I think exists is the passing dissonance, because it is the relationship between two tones that form a consonant interval of a third. This is one reason why I reject the idea of the triad as a kind of primitive. It's not. It's the third that's the primitive element of melodic, and then if you combine two contiguous thirds, you get a triad, right? So the triad itself is some kind of polyphonic entity, right? And even in the expression of a third, there's implied polyphony. Either the bottom tone and the top tone is connected by a passing tone going either up or down, right? So what's the property of this? Yes. So this side of the dissonance moves up, right? So what is the origin of that dissonance in my thinking?
La.
It would have to be this, right? So that is some kind of passing tone. All right. Now, what is this? G.
Goes to fa, right?
Is it coming from here?
La. La, sol, fa.
It could be. That's its goal, right? I would say so. Right? Okay, wow. Well, you notice that this is separated somehow by this, right? Okay? So it looks like even here there is a kind of structural distance and not linear sequencing, right? This tone actually does not directly connect to that in terms of consonance and dissonance. It connects over here, all right? So that's a very simple indication that perhaps the sequence of chords that you hear or sonorities that you hear don't necessarily really follow one another in the musicalistic structure. There might be things in between. All right, well, now let's look at the top voice. So this is a dissonance, and that is also a passing tone. So this might very well be La, Sol, Fa, and La, Si, Do. Yeah? Two contrary motion passing tones. All right, well, let's look at this soprano. If we do the same thing to it, don't pay any attention to this. This looks like it's on what degree of F? 5th degree, right? So you've got this, right, and that. So this goes to the 6th degree, which creates this 5 to 6 notion above the F. And then what happens here?
So that comes out of fa somewhere.
Is that a consonance or a dissonance?
Distance.
Yes, it has to be a dissonance. Well, where is its connection?
He probably played a fa.
Well, he did. I mean, you would have to. But even if you didn't, and you had this, and F is the fundamental, you would have to say that this has got to be from there, right? All right, once again, you see that there's something interesting going on here, that these chords are not connected one by one like that, right? You cannot make a direct connection between this, and that. This is prolonged somehow. This passing tone, which is unfolding this third, very much within the tonic chord, is removed by 1, 2, 3 sonorities somehow. So there again, it's an instance of what I call structural distance as opposed to linear distance. All right? So even in this like 5/3 progression, you begin to see the basic principles of musical organization. Now, I haven't really mentioned the term harmony, and I haven't mentioned the tonic chord or the subdominant chord or the submediant chord, whatever. All I've talked about is the relationship of consonance and dissonance. Now, what about this soprano line? Seems like there's a jump here, right? What are the consonances in this line? That's a consonance. That presumably is a consonance. That is a consonance. And that is a consonance. The only dissonant tone here in the soprano that's given is this tone. And it's approached by leap, but then it's left by step. So that's confirming that it's coming from somewhere, and that's F. Now, let's give us a harmonization. Oh, a realization, okay? So, isn't this what he played?
One should hope so.
What happens here?
Me.
And what else? You're going to double the
Jump.
E? I would jump down like that. Yeah, of course. Don't be shocked, right? Okay? And then that's sustained, and that's like that. Yeah? Okay, and if you wrote that in Professor or Dr. X's class, would you get an A+ on that?
Only if X equals Wallerstedt.
Yes, that's true. No, that's great. That's a simple keyboard-like realization of this. All right, now my next question is, just play this melody line. Right? The first 4 notes, does that sound like a real melody? Suppose you made a cantus firmus that did that. Does that demonstrate any kind of movement, those first 4 notes? I don't know. I mean, it sounds great, but it's a little boring,
I don't
right?
think it sounds great.
What?
It's okay.
It's okay. That's better. Yeah, it's okay, right? All right. Well, thank goodness there's all this leaping motion in the bass to kind of offset that. And then I think this leap is kind of jarring. Play the melody by itself once again. No pedal. Yeah, you're trying to turn it into Chopin. No, right? We want to try and make it sound as bad as possible. Right? Isn't that a little disconnected there? All right. Well, I think something else is going on in here. Now, you'll probably not buy this, but I have a feeling that this is what's going on. How is it that you hear this? You told me that you didn't think anything was going on in here. You're coming back to the same sonority, yes? It does move inside of this chord like that, yeah? So essentially, all the notes, the soprano line and the bass line, take that out, right, has added up to a simple tonic triad, or the fundamental triad. And all it seems that you're doing is moving inside of that. Now the next question is, what would happen? You see this gap in the line here, right? That's not exactly a melodic connection. Is there a way to interpret this so that you get a clearer image that we've had some kind of complete motion in this tonic? Now this is where I don't really want you to look at it. I'd like you to just hear it. But you can look at it and see if you, don't you all hear this as like a completed segment? There's obviously one thing, but actually nothing much has happened. The tension in this, and I do not like to use that word, but, you know, psychoacoustically we might say that the tension in this progression is somewhere in here, yes? All right, now, what I would like for you to do, Michael, is to sustain the F in the bass, not with the pedal, but just sustain the note in the bass and play the chords above this. Right. Well, the greatest amount of tension is here. Yep? Do you not agree? Try it one more time. Okay. Describe to me or give me some kind of descending order of tension in this. The greatest or maximum amount of tension or dissonance is where? Is it here? Is it here? I think it's here, yes? So we'll give that a 1, right? That's highest. Where is the next strongest tension or dissonance?
The one before it.
That, yes? So we give that a 2. And this would be what? 3, right? Why? Why is that less tense than this or this?
Because it has the fewest dissonance sonorities.
Well, yeah, that's a consonance with this note. Yes, it's a 5 to 6, right? This is the dissonant note. That's actually a common note. Yeah? All right. So that's the graded dissonance. So what in this little progression is actually driving this chord to that chord? The greatest amount of tension or the greatest amount of dissonance. If it's the greatest amount of dissonance, that's going to be imply that the dissonance is some kind of passing tone. It's obvious, it's there, right? Okay? Well, where's the passing tone from do to la?
C.
Is there one?
It's implied.
Or middle voice.
Is there one
Does
here?
that count?
Do, si, la?
There is a C.
Well, there's a B flat there, right? But that goes here, right?
Well, you can almost imagine these dominants leading.
Could go there, right? Okay. Well, what else do you see in this? Is there another point that, you know, might even sound even stronger than that?
La, sol, fa.
Yes. Right. The soul is, why is that more dissonant than the B flat? B flat is a fourth, right? That has absolutely a dissonant property, and it does go 5, 4, and 3, but is that right? Right there. Okay. That seems to be less dissonant than that G. What is the interval between G and F here? It's a 2, right? Or 9, whatever. So that's the maximum dissonance. Well, what if we were to think about the fact that it's this progression, la, sol, fa, that's actually driving the tension or the direction in this phrase. This is less successful because literally it's leaping from do to la, right? So what if we were to reimagine this? And let's try to recompose this. And we'll put on the soprano now this degree, right? I don't know why I'm writing those things, right? And then we have to have the B flat, right? Okay. And then, let's say G. And then F. Now, let's configure this. We got 2 B flats, 2 G's, and 1 F. Right? Let's do that so that it sounds like this. Can you reconfigure that? Now, sustain the F and play just the chords with it now. Right. Is that more dissonant than this position? Or do they have basically the same amount of tension in them? Play the original in the same way, sustaining the F. Now play this. Do you hear any difference? Any difference?
The first one sounds more dissonant.
The first one?
I feel like that's a wrong answer.
No, I'm asking you. All right,
It
now,
sounds like the-
I want you to play just the melody of this one. All right, don't play the repeated notes. Just pretend like it's a cantus firmus. Okay, now play this one. No repeated notes. Right. Which one of these do you hear a much more directed progression in? It's the second one, yes. This soprano is hiding the basic design, melodic design. Now, in early work of Chomsky's, which he borrowed from, right over here, from Harris, Harris thought of sentences as having kind of kernel structure. And Chomsky confiscated that term, kernel sentence. And he first worked with a kernel design of a sentence. And he said that the kernel sentence itself goes through various transformations to produce the differences that you see in sentence structure. He used that to explain interrogatives, declaratives, embedded structures. Yes.
What exactly is a kernel sentence?
A kernel sentence is a specific form of a sentence, right? And Harris's idea was that discourse was generated through the use of these kernel sentences, and they could become larger and larger in structure. Well, that's not exactly right, but Chomsky changed that, and he said that the kernel sentence is the pathway for transformation, so that the kernel idea or the kernel sentence passes through various kinds of transformation. Now, a kernel sentence would give you the fundamental progression here, the passing tone, consonants, dissonance. Actually, there's a tone missing there. There would be a consonance there, right? But it moves directly to another dissonance. This becomes a transformed dissonance, and then it moves to its consonance. So the basic progression here is 3, 2, and 1. Where is this B flat actually coming from? It what? Yes, more than likely that. And so that would be the passing status of this, right? Okay. And you do not hear that, you don't hear that, right? And this then passes on down to the G, right? And then to the F. But it is implied moving from the A. So there is the connection there. You don't hear this, you do hear that, you don't hear this, and you hear that. So that's an alternate way of representing what we got from over here, right? So essentially, you hear this third progression, right? Now, let's set this without Michael's playing it. What are the next notes? Right?
So,
Right?
mi, do.
That would be it, yes? All right, now play that. You've already played it, play it again. Right? Now that sounds complete. Yeah? Now, is there any way that we can derive this soprano from that?
Sure. Octave transposition.
This voice becomes the soprano, doesn't it? And then in the exchange here, this moves to what?
That stays up, doesn't it?
Moves up, right? Okay? And then this continues up, right? You got that? Well, at any rate, that is still there, I think. Or is it? Yeah, it's literally there in the melody. But the melody is generated over here from this kernel progression. Now, I think that there are two different kinds of transformational procedures. One is the transformation of dissonance into consonance, which allows two dissonances to follow each other, and it creates the illusion that you have a series of consonant sounds progressing. If you didn't have that, you wouldn't be able to move on to second species, where you add dissonance in between the vertically generated consonances. But you have to be aware, and this something is I don't think is made completely clear. I don't think it's made clear at all, that the sonorities, intervals or triads that you see in 2 or 3 first species counterpoint are not all genuine consonances. The majority of them have to be transformed consonances, but they lose their originating status, and because they are consonants, then we may re-add dissonance in the form of second species, an in-between tone. What happens in third species? The dissonant passing tone of second species becomes what? Transformed into a consonance, right? And so you now have, instead of 2 half-note pulses, you have quarter notes. So the obligatory rule is that if you have 2 half notes moving together above whole notes, those 2 half notes must be in a consonant relationship, always. Otherwise, you destroy the hierarchical relationship between consonants and dissonance. But once you have transformed the 2 half notes into consonances, right, you can do what? You can add dissonance in between. That is the significance of third species. It moves the dissonance to yet another level of transformation. And that is the reason why I believe, intuitively, perhaps in Fuchs's mind, that you go whole notes, half notes, quarter notes, then syncopated notes. Because the syncopation is a rhythmic transformation of what species? Not second species, but third species. The suspension is a result of some kind of unpronounced feature in a third species progression, right? Okay, so we can produce this soprano line through the idea of octave transposition, right? That is the other type of transforming device, transformational device. You have two things. You have octave displacement and you have the transformation of dissonance into consonance. Those two things are fundamental to generating a musical structure. Do you see how this works? Now, let's continue with the next phrase. So, this is actually here. We've got a 3, a 2, and a 1, right? Well, I think we would need to connect it to that. All right, well now, is that a real stopping place? No, you don't hear that, right? It just sounds like nothing's happened here. Then it begins to move. Now play the last chord in this. Well, you repeat it, right? Now go on. All right, now suppose you were to take that accidental out. All right, let's go. That's tied over, right? Did I miss something here?
Octave bass.
Yeah. See, I talk about octaves, but I just don't hear them. No. Okay. All right. Okay. Well, what about that? Does that sound anything like this over here?
Yeah.
Vaguely like it. Okay. Well, what happens if we were to turn that upside down? Right? Well, let's add some notes to it. Okay. Now, can we get the same kind of thing that we did here in this second phrase? Yeah, of course. I'm not going to take the time to write it out, but you know, that's this 3 prolonged, and then we've got this motion to 2, which is the passing time. Except this time, in this phrase, it does not go on, right? So play these two phrases together. Okay, now, can you play it and change the soprano to this? Well, no, don't do that. You've got to get, you got to get the G. Da-da-da. Well, I hold on to that. Right. Now play it one more time. No, without the extra. One more time. It's exactly the same thing, is it not?
Yeah.
Right. So this is some kind of recursion, yeah? So you've had this pattern, A, G, F, and then that's recaptured. You don't, I mean, that descends to Tartarus, right? It goes into the inner voice, right? And this repeats itself, right? La, si, sol, but it never goes to the F. It must, right? So I'm going to just put this F here, right? But we don't hear that. That is an example of interruption, I believe. All right? Play it again and go on with the written soprano. Wait a minute. You played a B natural. Yeah, because there's one written there. What's the function of that B natural?
Inflection, to make it sound closer to the do and soprano.
Yes. Well, that's a very good description, to make it sound closer to the gold tone or another tone. Except the B is not really going to the C, right? It's implied going back to A and then to G. But the accidental propels it up, and it looks like there's a connection going up to the C, right? And that is kind of similar to this, but we get a different note here. That's where we started from. So this is actually coming from inside and supported by this chromatic tone, which moves up, right? That, in my opinion, has no harmonic significance whatsoever. What's the harmonic relationship between this and that? Is there anything?
3 to 2.
What is actually the function of this chord? In this progression, what is the function of it?
Passing.
Aren't these two things connected together? Right? Okay. That is like a passing chord, incomplete neighbor chord, right? The B flat and the G belong to one another, right? These two chords are connected. It forms a transformed consonance. They're dissonances, right? This you do not hear, right? Otherwise, you'd have 3 dissonant chords in a row. It's not possible, right? This becomes a transformed dissonance. You omit the actual resolution of this dissonance here, and you move to here. Things like that happen in language all the time. That's unpronounced. The same thing is happening here. You do not hear it, and then it moves to the passing tone exactly as it did here. Now, I actually think you hear this. Some people say, well, you're making it up. I don't know. I really do think that you hear something like this. And in this particular case, the accidental plus the stopping on this chord, I think clearly indicates some kind of division. Now, don't you hear that as like a semicadence there? Play it again. Now with the accidental. It's the same thing, except the B natural pushes you more towards the do. Now let's continue.
From there.
Yes. Now, Mr. Morris was a pretty smart man, right? I'm sure all these are like just improvised on the spot. He wrote them down, right? Now, this is where it gets, in my opinion, quite complicated, right? And I was always taught in the formative years of my Schenkerian studies, where I had to take a series of inoculations, right? That you don't start by teaching root position chords, because voice leading implies stepwise motion. So you begin with contrapuntal expansions of the tonic chord. Well, perhaps Mr. Morris didn't get that lecture, right? So these are a bunch of 5/3 chords. Now, do you not hear this as like a semicadence? Do you all agree with that? And it's just not the fact that everything comes to a halt there, a long note. That does emphasize it. But now, what happens after this note?
The same note accidental.
That's the same chord, right? But it's a different quality. This becomes minor, right? And what's on the top there? Right? Okay. Then let's get what comes after that. Play right there, Michael. All right, stop right there. Now, play that again. Oh, no, wait a minute, don't play it. Somebody tell me what the soprano is.
C. Sol.
And then that goes on back to, that goes over here to A, right? Is that correct? Okay. Now, what if we were to take the accidentals out of this? Don't play any accidentals, except maybe the B flat, which is in the key, right? Stop. Now, suppose you take the B flat out. Put the B flat back in. Now, do these chords all relate to one another?
Yeah.
Well, you would say that because I told you that. Right? Do you see this? Right? So then we go back to the F chord. Now this is one of the things that people don't buy and find incredible. Right? I think it is something that is really going on here. Now, this is, remember last week we did that chorale and we talked about embedding? Yes? And I said that that was not an example of embedding, that if there was something embedded, it occurred in an expansion of a 2 or 4, whatever, right? Well, this is actually, in my opinion, an embedded chord. It accounts for the accidentals that you see here, and it does sound, what would most people call that? They wouldn't call it a tonicization of C minor. They would call it some kind of motion to G, right? Yes? Well, I don't think that's right. Now, if I take the accidental out of here, right, and let's say this G, right, is now connected after the interruption, not to this. This goes all the way back and reconnects here. Then this is going to have to go La, Sol. Doesn't it come back to Sol? So what? Fa, yes. But the Sol is the thing that is prolonged, right? But inside this C chord, and this is disguised, the surface always is hiding things. This chord is lifted out, it's prolonged. And this E, let's say that we turn this upside down again. And we're going to put this E on the top here. And what would we have? Well, let's just harmonize this. Is that not correct? Yeah? Okay. Now, what do you see inside of this? If we put the E flat on the top, no, you can't say it. Come here. Keep going. Hold on to the D. Well, E flat, D, C. Right. Now, take the E flat out. Now take the F sharp out. That is a C chord prolonged. And what is interesting about it? Doesn't this relate to something that goes on over here? Very similar progressions. Not exactly the same, but it is similar. Now, the chromaticism, in my way of thinking, disguises all of this, plus the position of the soprano is hiding this third progression. And the chromaticism with the E flat, in this case, like a augmented second or whatever, right? That's like an Egyptian scale or something. Okay. It's hiding it. So actually it's this G that's being prolonged, and so you get yet another recursion right after the interruption. Is it clear that this, whatever happens here, is not the same as happens here? This is harking back to the A, the passing tone. Okay, now let's continue finishing this. The last phrase. Play it one more time. Now, doesn't that go la, sol, fa? Except it goes la, fa, sol, fa, right? This time, the main soprano tones have surfaced to give you a concluding octave at the end, cadence. So, there is a third recursion. This is very similar to that chorale, except this one does have an interruption in it, and it does embed a prolongation of that G. So this creates a rhythmic effect. This is a delay in the third progression. And the tension mounts up in the phrase, and this is prolonged, and I don't think it's a coincidence that this G that is prolonged has all these chromatic tones in it. But that has nothing to do with the abstract voice leading, or what is generating the coherence in this phrase. And all of these things, I maintain, at some degree or at some level, you are intuitively experiencing this. The idea of this kind of thinking is to confirm the intuitions of the listener, or to confirm the intuitions of the creator or the speaker, which would be in linguistics. And I think this goes on without your conscious awareness. It has to, right? Which brings us now to Prometheus and the difference between conscious awareness and just being or awareness. All right, thank you, Michael, for your incredible rendition. That's pretty good. Right. Okay, well, how many of you actually believe that?
I think I understand why people don't buy the accidental thing. It's because, I mean, this helps to understand the listener's perspective, but some writers wouldn't do that on purpose. You know what I mean?
Which writers?
For example, if someone would write a E flat, F sharp, trying to make some
Expressive?
Yes, like yeah,
Well, it is.
yeah.
I'm not denying that.
Exactly, yeah.
That has a psychological effect.
Yes.
But it can't be just like, oh wow, I'm going to put an E flat in here. Or an F sharp.
Some people. So with some people you don't know.
Well, I would say that that's just purely like spontaneous, or I don't know.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that the point is not what the writer wrote, it's what we listen. And that makes sense.
Well, I believe so. But what is E flat or F sharp doing in the key of F major? I mean, F sharp is like an altered tonic degree, right? Doesn't make any sense. What?
Cool stuff.
Yeah, right, okay, didn't think of it that way. Well, in that case, Schoenberg is really cool.
Oh,
Which it is, I guess, I don't know. Look, that's a joke. You understand what I'm saying.
Smile for the camera.
What?
Smile for the
Okay, any other questions about this?
but so so even if the composer does write it for some other reason, and they have the same things,
But wait a minute, how do you know that the composer wrote it for some other
so
reason?
maybe they did, maybe they wrote it because F sharp looks nice, but
No, well, look at maybe
but
maybe
then when
it
they play
sounds
it
nice.
back and they say, okay, but you're saying intuitively they're hearing it like this.
Well, yeah, but doesn't that also support the idea that, you know, there's conscious thought and then there is thought where you do things and you're not aware of it. And then
Sure.
after the fact, you say, oh, well, yeah, that's really cool, or something.
Well, I think some people don't make that final leap, but yeah.
Well, I mean, you have to admit that you cannot introspect into your mind. You cannot say, oh, yeah, this is what my mind is doing. You just cannot do that. But what you can do is to use the consciousness, right, which is actually split off from what's actually going on in the mind. You know, just like the word processor in the computer is actually split off from the actual process of doing that kind of computation. And so the consciousness says, I'm going to do this. And it doesn't realize that the I'm going to do has been already decided long before, or a fraction before you decide to do it. So the consciousness is like an epiphenomenon of the activity of the brain. And many philosophers, for centuries, ever since, you know, this kind of mental activity originated in human beings, have tried to figure out, well, what the heck is it? Why does it do to me what it's done or is doing? And why is it that I do things that I don't want to do, but I do them anyway? And then why is it that I can't do the things that I really want to do? Yeah? And the fact is that consciousness is never a guide to, you know, actuality. Consciousness is a way in which we deal abstractly with the physical properties of the world. And I've said this 1,000 times. If you were to be able to see the actual nature of the world, what is it that you would see? Would you see trees and grass and little lambs and would you see all that?
Not in Philadelphia.
Yeah. It's more likely you would see the silence of the lambs. Right? Right. What would you see?
We don't know.
Just a bunch of information.
Information in the form of what? Well, that's interesting. That's an interesting object.
Light, I think. If it's
Well, actually, your ability to perceive objects is dependent upon certain properties of light.
But we're limited.
yeah, wouldn't it be too much information?
Well, I don't know. I don't know. I'm asking, what would you see?
We don't know.
Lots of that.
Well, it's saying we would know. What would you actually see? Would you see people, things, places, people going places, doing things? No. What would you see?
Waves.
Waves? Waves of what? Waves of ecstasy. No.
Energy.
Waves of what?
Energy.
Energy beams.
Okay. Now we're getting
That sometimes
into
function as
physics.
particles.
Yeah, what if they're all wrong?
what is matter? Nobody knows what that is, right? But if we were to, like, as Shelley says, pull away the painted veil of what we create as consciousness, what would happen? He means that philosophically, but I really mean it in terms of physics, in terms of actuality. What would you see?
Matter. I mean, like.
Well, you'd see some aspect of matter, right? Wouldn't you see just a bunch of atomic elements of atomic structure, and all actually bound together? Would you be able to see the clear divisions between where that wall starts and the television begins? No, you would not perceive that. It would be just one, like, more or less continuous whatever.
Ether.
Well, that's what they thought the ether was, or whatever. We found out that it was not quite like that. Are you following what I'm saying?
Sure.
Right? That's shocking to most people. Well, there are two things that was said in the last class that were actually, I didn't take time to register it sufficiently. You said something about the bells, this is in reference to the Neruda poem, as an example of the individual that seeks to sound above the others. And that somehow the bell is a symbol of one's personal awareness of existence. Didn't you say that? Yes. And then you said, when we were talking about the ocean, and this is actually pretty perceptive, and I didn't catch it right away, but the ocean is filled with life, right? But you're not really aware of it. But the ocean continues doing what it's doing over and over again. And the life in the ocean, is it aware of that? No, it isn't. So that's a pretty good, I think that's a pretty good idea. So maybe we'll put you all on the faculty. No, okay. All right. Nah. And also in the second poem, the Neruda poem that we read last week, I left off the punchline, which is on the next page. And the reason I did that, I just couldn't go on anymore. I was about to collapse from emotion, and I just couldn't turn the page. But do you have the poem? All right, let's read the punchline.
Which page is it?
I think it's page 85.
What? You just want to say it.
So the poem is, I don't want to get into any, like, you know, funeral parlor attitude today, but, you know, what is that poem really saying? Is that we're always looking towards tomorrow, right? But tomorrow never comes. The poem is everybody, right? Isn't it on page 85?
So 87 is the continuation.
What?
87 is the continuation.
Yes, it's on the top of the next page. One way you find out is that there's no little line at the top. All right, so read the punchline, I think. He's always coming back to the ideas like this. What does it say? Somebody read it out loud for me.
In Spanish.
No, not in Spanish. In English.
The one on page 87 or the previous one on 85?
I don't know, the last segment of the poem.
Oh, the last segment.
87.
Why search in vain in every door in which we will not exist because we have not arrived yet? That is how I found out that I was exactly like you and like everybody.
Read it again.
Why search in vain in every door in which we will not exist because we have not arrived yet?
Read that again.
Why search in vain in every door in which we will not exist because we have not arrived yet?
What in the world does that mean? Doesn't that connect with, think of the connection between the other poem. Of course, you've forgotten the other poem. But what is the poem about? It says that the that the sea does what? You remember the other poem?
Renews or refreshes, it yells or it shouts sea, or it says sea, something like that. The sea says without rest.
Which the sea says what?
You want to say sea? Time does not wrinkle, it does not run out. Sea, the sea says without rest. Earth, the earth says, man waits.
Earth, the earth says, right? Man waits, right? Okay. Well, connect that with this the last part of this poem. And one more time.
Why search in vain in every door in which we will not exist, because we have not arrived yet? That is how
Well, wait a minute. So, the searching is what? If you haven't arrived yet and you're still searching, you're waiting to what? Waiting to arrive. Yes. So, isn't that part of the idea that I am this way today, but I will be that way tomorrow? I want to be that way tomorrow. Right? It's always a constant projection of what should be rather than what is. It's a psychological dilemma of human beings, and it's an operation of the conscious mind, I think. Now, I'm not sitting here like some kind of guru. This is embedded in every religious and philosophical system that's ever been talked about since, the march out of Africa many years ago. It's a primary question. Why is this? And so what conclusion does Neruda come to?
He's just like everyone else. I mean, that
Yeah,
is,
what does that mean?
we all search in vain.
Yeah, we're all the same. We do exactly the same thing. Human beings are essentially all the same, right? Now, there are two things. Why are we spending so much time? Well, we haven't spent that much time on it, but why are we spending time with something like Prometheus? By the way, for those of you who are not here, that is the Greek spelling of Prometheus. What are those letters again? Pi,
Rho,
Rho,
Omega,
Omicron.
Oh my god.
Mu.
Yeah, mu. H, right? It looks like H. What is that? Isn't that the letter that follows? It's eta. And then what?
Theta.
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 Uh,
No, Epsilon.
You don't know your Greek. Epsilon, upsilon,
Sigma.
sigma.
I only remember
Okay,
the ones
now
I was
you
in
know.
math class.
You can go around in all of your classes and write on the board, ancient Greek. And people will say,
How
wow,
pretentious.
you have a classical education. Actually, that is what I was discussing in the lobby of the Warwick with Bob Levin, who I hadn't seen in 1,000 years. He was bemoaning the fact that at Harvard there are no theory requirements. Well, as far as I know, there was never any theory requirement at Harvard. I was going there to study classics. That's why I was going there. And then I thought, well, maybe I'll study musicology. You could study musicology there, but you would not choose Harvard to study performance or whatever.
Unless you're Bernstein.
What?
Unless you're Bernstein.
Well, I don't think Bernstein. What is Bernstein's connection with Harvard?
He still
went
did
there.
theory there.
He did what?
Theory.
Music theory. I think he did a bunch of other things.
So
The music theory department wasn't exactly the most esteemed in the world. Who was the theory teacher at Harvard?
someone other than Bernstein.
Yes, someone else, someone really famous. You find out.
30s?
What?
What did that get? Kingdom?
No,
he was still in.
yeah.
I'm just naming.
John,
That doesn't make any difference. How did we get on that? Okay. Well, we why would we study Prometheus? Why would we study anything Greek? Why? What is the importance of doing this? Do you know why? What does this have to say to us?
you're just like everybody else.
Well,
History repeats itself. And
what's the significance of Prometheus?
Whatever we attribute to it.
All right. Well, let's continue with Io or Io. Okay, Ocean has come in and out. This seems like to be a family affair here. The Oceanids are still hovering about, I think, and Ocean has made his appearance, and his daughters are the Oceanids, right? And so it appears that Ocean wants Prometheus to relent and try to cooperate with Zeus and give him what he wants and relinquish his pain. Okay, so Prometheus tells him, I think it's time for you to leave. And so Ocean gets back on his winged horse monster. What's the name of the monster?
Hippocampus.
Yeah, or hippocampus. Yeah, that's one idea. Or hippoelectron. That's another word. What is that? It has various meanings.
isn't it region of the brain?
Yeah, campus, but it's not.
You mean what?
Some people translate it as seahorse. Other people translate it as a winged horse with the head of a rooster. It's a weird thing, right? The Greeks came up with these very strange ideas, right? They're all embedded in psychological constructions. And we're going to talk about another one when we talk about Io. All right, so Ocean disappears, and Prometheus is still mildly upset. But then Io appears. She comes in. And, of course, who is Io? And at this point, who is Io?
A beautiful young girl horned like a heifer.
All right, anybody know the story of Io?
Zeus wanted her, but whoever Zeus's wife at the time was cast a spell on Io because she was jealous. And what was the woman's name?
Zeus thought Io was irresistibly beautiful.
That was
And so
Hera.
he comes to her and wants to have these assignations with her. And he tells her to go out into the beautiful field and lie down and wait for him, right? And so to disguise the assignation from Hera's piercing and jealous eyes, he makes thick clouds descend, yes, to hide their activity. Well, Hera is no fool, and she knows, he's up to something no good like he usually is. And so the clouds disperse, and when they disperse, she finds Zeus standing in the field next to this beautiful white heifer, right? And Zeus has turned Io into this white cow, right? And Hera says, right? And she says, this cow is really beautiful. Why don't you give it to me as a gift? And of course, Zeus is not going to say, well. He says, oh, sure. And so the cow belongs to Hera, And she then asked Argus, the monster with 1,000, not 1,000, they couldn't count that high, 100 eyes, to come watch the cow. And so Zeus says, well, I got to do something, right? So he calls his newly found buddy or lackey, Hermes. What's another word for Hermes? Mercury, the messenger, right? So Hermes comes, and the thing about Argus, not Argo, but Argus, right? He has 100 eyes, yes? Well, so some of them can close during sleep, but others will be open. So he's constantly vigilant. But Hermes tries to figure out how in the world I can get this guy to like completely go to sleep so I can kill him, right? Well, he plays music for him, and then he tells him stories. And apparently it was so boring and so bad that Argus falls asleep and Hermes kills him, right? Well, of course, Hera's watching this all on YouTube, and she says, you're not going to get away with this. And so she sends the biting gadfly, one of those big green flies like they have on Cape Cod, which are horrible. They bite you, stinging flies. And the fly chases her, and she's wandering all over the world. But at the same time, the ghost of Argus is there to torment her and watch her. And she has been wandering all over the world. And she's been to the Black Sea, in that area. What is the area that connects the Black Sea with the other sea of the Mediterranean? Isn't there an isthmus? Maybe not an isthmus, but some kind of narrow passageway. What is that called? The Bosphorus. Bosphorus, yes? That's named after Io. It means cow or oxen, yes? All right? And where is the Ionian Sea? You know, don't know where the Ionian Sea? You know where the Adriatic is. Right? Anyway, look up where the Ionian Sea. That's obviously named for Io. Yeah? Well, Io goes through all these wanderings, and finally she finds herself in Scythia next to Prometheus. And she's like worn out and just all to pieces. And what does she say? Well, I want to start on page 53, and they're going to be like 15 little fragments, and we're going to finish this today in 30 minutes.
I have to leave at around like 11:42 for coaching.
Okay, all right. So Prometheus says, fate, that concludes everything. It's not fated to make that happen. Not yet, not the way. 10,000 sorrows must wrench me. That's the way I escape my chains. And then he says something very peculiar. Art is far feebler than necessity.
Which page is this?
This is on page 53 at the top. What do you think that means?
He doesn't like us.
Why would he say something like that?
Does the capitalization have anything to do with it?
Well, it's the beginning of the line.
Sure, but wasn't there an entity that represented necessity, or my memory is awful?
Oh, well, what is necessity?
What has to happen?
Yes, what actually is, right? And so art is what? what could be, yes. So right there you have what could be as opposed to what actually is. And who introduced the what could be? Prometheus. That's one of the things he did for human beings. Okay. All right. Well, let's continue on the next page. Top of the next, page 55. And I believe this is the chorus talking. Yeah. Tell us, what's the use of doing good when there's no good in it for you? Doesn't he go through all this thing about, what he's done for humankind? Yes. And so he's complaining about, what suffering is all this, and then they retort, tell us, what's the use of doing good when there's no good in it for you? Haven't you heard that sentiment before? What is the point of doing good if you're not going to get anything out of it? I didn't hear that. Why? What are they saying? Should you do good if you're not going to get anything out of it?
Can we get something out of it regardless? Isn't the well-being of others going to bring you some sort of happiness or joy or satisfaction?
Well, isn't that related to, well, if I do this, I'm going to get that? Where if I do this, I'm going to become that? Isn't that what this means? All right. There are many voices speaking here. Okay. Let's continue to the next little section. And this is Eo's entrance. Speak to me, what did you do to deserve this? Where on earth have I strayed to? And then she moves like a cow for a shriek. Ooh, right. It wells up through her, a voice beyond her own, breaking out into wild, unstructured songs. You must be in the 21st century. Okay. Again, it's the horsefly. It bites my poor body. No, it's the ghost of Argos. No, it isn't. It's the ghost of Argus, right? Born out of earth. Earth, make it go away. Herdsman I see, scaring me with all his eyes. He stalks by. The eyes give me sly looks. But he's dead. Why can't the earth hold him under? From the dead dark he comes to hound me, drive me, so that I starve by the sands of the seashore. Now, unless you know part of the story of Io and where she comes in terms of mythology, Mediterranean mythology, I don't think you would really understand this. Now, maybe you would. Io is a Phoenician character. The Phoenicians were spectacular tradespeople, yeah. You've heard me speak of the island of Delos, right? If you ever have a chance to visit Delos, you'll see that quite literally it was the Las Vegas of the classical world. But it was also had great economic and political influence, and it was kind of a melting pot for all the civilizations that were around in the Mediterranean. Well, Delos is very much syncretic, or there were many, many different temples, many houses owned by different people from around the Mediterranean area, and there is a huge house that is the House of the Dolphins, and it was owned by a rich Phoenician merchant. So the Phoenicians were, their mythology was somehow embedded in Greek thinking and Greek mythology. And Io is a moon goddess in Phoenician mythology. And the moon goddess in Phoenician mythology is horned. And so hence the reference of Io as turned into a cow or an ox or whatever. And she's represented as the horned goddess. But she also represents the moon. And the wandering of Io is tantamount to the moon's wandering across the sky. The moon is in different positions. Yes, it wanders across the sky. And what is actually behind the moon as it wanders across the sky? If you look up in the sky and you see the moon in various shapes wandering around, what's behind it? Or what's up there with it?
A horsefly?
What?
Horsefly?
The stars.
Stars.
Other planets.
And what are the stars?
The constellations.
They are the eyes of They're the eyes of Argus. No, I didn't make that up. That's actually, on the 500-page book on Io. Right? That's very, very curious. All right. What?
What's the horse fly?
I couldn't tell you. I think that. All right, let's continue on. Now, does Io, does she make Prometheus calm down, or does she do the opposite? Have you all you've read this, yes?
She definitely does the opposite.
Yes, he gets enraged. He's even more angry. Why would he get more angry? Because Zeus is responsible for her torment, right? And her suffering. Right? So he becomes like totally enraged and just out of control. Now, we're on page 59. And
Sorry to end
she's
stream
trying
early.
to. Were you turning it off?